The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the March webinar this evening, and this evening's webinar is the Part 3 changes, Part 1. We're hoping there's going to be a Part 2 next month. We're in talks trying to get somebody from the DVSA to join us about this. So we're hoping to do a Part 2 next month. But for this evening, we've got a panel here with Lynn Barry, our chair, John Farlam from Smart Drive-In. We've got James Quinn, head of ADINJC training, and Nick Hibbert, our vice president. Good evening, everybody.
Evening.
Good evening.
And Lynn, I think you want to just kick this one off with a bit of what the ADINJC's view is, and maybe how the proposed changes are going to come in and what they're going to affect us like on October the 2nd, 2017.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us, because this is a current topic and it doesn't only affect trainers, but it could start to affect all ADIs in actual fact. The Part 3 changes have been announced for October the 2nd. I would like to point out, though, that those changes do need an amendment to regulation, and that would need to be approved before this can be implemented. So it isn't currently set in stone, and it's really important that if we feel there are issues, we carry on liaising with not only DVSA but also the rest of NASP. I've been at a NASP meeting all day today, and I can't say anything about what's happened at the meeting, but I would like to say that it's really important, as far as I'm concerned, to carry on keeping all the channels open. It's really going to be about negotiation and talking with the DVSA. I understand that they have at least one meeting planned, if not more, so that they can talk to ADI trainers and audit trainers, people who haven't perhaps had an opportunity to talk to them and air their views up to this point. We also will be holding another webinar, we hope to, with a member from the DVSA, because I think it's important that whilst I can answer some of the questions that you might have, they would be able to answer them even more fully. It's also important to note that this Part 3, once it starts, is for a trial period. It has been promised that that's a trial period of 6 months and that it will be reviewed at the end of that 6 months. I don't think everybody is fully appreciating that. Everybody at NASP and the NJC agree that the Part 3 does need to change, and that doing it in more of a style along the standards check is certainly something that we would be in agreement with. But there are some areas that do still concern us, which we feel could be better. We've written a document which is going to the DVSA tomorrow, just to say where our current position is with it. But the main things that are concerning us are that we feel this is different, because this standards check is going to be for somebody to qualify. It is not quite the same as somebody who's taking a standards check to stay on the register. Note when the DVSA talk about it, they do call it a standards check style. So somewhere, I just don't feel it's quite the same thing. And to say that in 1 hour, you can determine that somebody is fit then to become a fully qualified ADI, the NJC just feel that there needs to be something else. Maybe one of our suggestions is a probationary period for that PDI once they've qualified. There's lots of other industries where that happens, and I think it's something that we need to consider. We don't feel that the 1 hour is quite enough. We feel that that's going to reduce the standard in driver training, which is what's really worrying us, because that in itself is about road safety and the KSIs. We also feel, and this is the third thing, that there should be some sort of statutory logbook, and that logbook must be part of this. And that is something that we're actually quite passionate about, and something that has been discussed at length. We want to keep channels open. We want to help. We might even want to compromise somewhere along the line with what we're saying. And we want to represent members. I think we actually at the NJC have a lot of members who are ADI trainers. And that's why we've had so many of you who've written in with your views. And I thank you for that. We realise that we're here to represent everybody, and that not everyone who sent in has issues with this. Some people seem happy with it, but I do have to say that we would have to go with what the majority are thinking, and that we look at it democratically. So the majority of people who've written into us do have challenges and issues that they want addressed, and that's really what we're hoping to do tonight. Just to discuss it more, to look at it more, to perhaps try and come up with some solutions that we can take forward. And the document will be going off tomorrow to the DVSA. And further from that, NASP will also be coming up with more ideas as well. I can't say more than that at this point in time. So over to you, Ed. Thanks for letting me just say that.
Right, thank you, Lynn. Thanks for that. Just so now people have had a bit of a warm up and they've got a bit of background from you there, Lynn. Thank you. I just want to point people that are listening, the attendees there, on your control panel at the right hand side, you'll see a part on that control panel that allows you to type in questions to the panel. We welcome all the questions, any feedback, even if it's not a question and you want to just put points forward. You have your views. It's an option for you to type in anything you want in there, and that's all. We can review this all afterwards, so we can take points from this and add things towards what we're going to do and get the voices heard that from you guys out there. So type your questions in there. I'm sure we're going to get loads of questions. If I can't get through all the questions, then we'll have to sort of maybe look at them afterwards and see if we can get a statement out, maybe Lynn or something like that, to answer it, if we can answer any questions afterwards. There might even be questions on tonight that we can't actually answer here tonight. We'll have to go away and consider them and then come back to you. So if there are complicated questions, we might just leave that to one side and then come back later. Okay, so welcome to Type Away, guys. Yeah. So back to the panel. What is the pink license going to still be available? I don't know if that was mentioned in what you just read out there, Lynn.
It is still available at the moment. I think what Mark McGee has said is that will be up for review. It's certainly, the NJC was always of the opinion in the past that the pink license should go, because we felt it wasn't being regulated properly, that it was actually being abused. But I do have to say, I think in the last 12 months or so, there have been far less of them, that it's been monitored much better by the DVSA. So it depends really how the trainee licence is used. My concern is that because the way this Part 3 is going to be carried out with a pupil, but some PDIs will just think that they have to have a trainee licence, and then we might start to get vast numbers of people wanting trainee licences again. It can have an effect on all ADIs.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the pink license scheme. So for me, as I said in our workshop yesterday, it was a very important part for my learning. For me to sit down and read a book and then maybe do things in theory through real play, it just wasn't the same as getting in a car and sitting there and working things out for myself and using experiential learning. And for me, that was a massive, massive way that I learned to do what I do, and it's helped me get to where I am now. So for people like myself who maybe aren't academic and can do things academically, that trainee license is such an important part of the training, and if it's regulated well enough and used correctly, I think it's a massive bonus to the industry.
That's the important point, though, isn't it, Ed? That it's used, that it is used properly and it's monitored properly. And I take on board fully what you're saying there about its use for some people. It's not essential for everybody, but having said that, if they need to find a pupil to take, then they may choose this route, whereas before they might not have done.
I agree with that. I'm just going to bring John in on that one, Nick, first, because John was just going to come in with something then. John, if you want to just come forward.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Across the Irish Sea. I think the trainee license is a great idea. It's something I've never been opposed to. What I've been opposed to is the way that it's managed, because it has a history of being managed very, very badly. And being abused. I mean, like yourself, Ed, I actually taught myself to drive on wasteland. I didn't teach myself to be an instructor. Although, coming to think about it, my training was so poor as an instructor, I probably did teach myself to be an instructor. And so I'd like to see the trainee license strengthened. But my worry is that people will be forced down the trainee license route when it's not a practical option for them. For example, school teachers or other people who might want to change career want to stay in their current job whilst they're training, and that would make getting practical experience on a trainee license a no-no for them. It just wouldn't be practical. And the danger is that the route that is proposed at the moment, I think, will almost coerce some people, I think, as Lynn mentioned, into feeling that a trainee license is the only way forwards.
Right, yeah.
I'm also a little bit worried. that I don't know how realistic this fear is, because I blow things out of proportion in my head sometimes. But I'm also a little bit worried that we could see students out there giving driving lessons and taking petrol money and things like that, and technically, I would call it technically operating illegally, you know. Not necessarily advertising for customers, but teaching friends and family, taking petrol money or taking something in exchange, you know. And I don't think we should be even doing anything that slightly encourages that.
Yeah. Another way of looking at this might be for using video monitoring. What's the panel's thoughts on using that while people are out there training, and you're having like a video evidence or audio evidence for some of their training?
I think that's a good idea. It's one of the things that we've put into the document that we're sending, that if that's feasible, then I would imagine that's a good, you know, we feel that that's a good thing to be using. It's the feasibility of it, which would need to be looked at. But certainly that would, you know, the evidence is there then, which can't really be questioned. So to me, that would be a good way. I think we also need to keep options open as to, and help people work out how they might be able to find pupils. I don't know that I see it as the trainer's responsibility. It's probably more the PDI's responsibility to find the pupil. That's going to have to be something that the trainer and PDI work out between themselves.
It's an interesting thought. That, Lynn, and I think I agree with you. However, some very good trainers will find themselves disadvantaged because the large schools, for example, will easily be able to offer service there that they can't. And it's not the DVSA's job to determine commercial considerations and to consider things like that, but it is something I think that as an industry, as a body, we need to consider and think about.
Yeah,
and that's where our members have been writing to us, because they are so concerned. Some of the smaller businesses are concerned as to how they are going to find the pupils.
Yeah, Nick, I think you were just wanting to come in earlier.
Well, a couple of things. Some time ago, a survey was done on the number of PDIs that had a pink badge and took their exam, and the number that were trained without a pink badge, and it worked out at almost 50%, 50-50. So there was almost nothing in it, which makes me believe that if the standard of training was improved, then you wouldn't need the pink badge. However, I can now see that if the DVSA run this way with having, like on a standards check, you have to have a driver there and it's no role play anymore, then I can see that people are going to almost push for the pink badge to stay. But I quite agree with you, John, and obviously Lynn, that the problem with the pink badge is it is not monitored correctly. It's open to abuse, and I think pretty much anyone in the industry really knows that, even people who have been on a pink badge. So I'm not putting you on the spot, Ed, but when you had your pink badge, was it properly monitored when you had it? You don't need to
yes,
open yourself to slander here.
No, mine was monitored correctly, and we signed off the lessons, did all that. So there was absolutely no. My trainer there was straight down the line, and had told me from the beginning how it would work. So I had a very good idea of what it was all about and everything. But I have actually trained people that have been forced down that road. I've had people for Part 3 rescue training that have been forced down a training license road because of the fact that they just want trainers out there in vehicles. Not that that's what they wanted to do, and they didn't find it very helpful having the pupils there. They felt lost, they felt abandoned. So I think it's quite important for the trainers to keep that communication with their trainees, not just put them on a pink license and abandon them, like some of them do. But that's all comes under the monitoring side of it.
Can I say as well that we did have people who, we knew of cases where people had 2 or even 3 trainee licenses given and then never ended up actually passing or becoming an ADI. So that's a long time to be on those licenses and to be charging money and never to end up as fully qualified.
Yeah.
So, you know, if it's monitored properly, and we would hope that there will be improvements with that, then there isn't so much of an issue. But that was the issues in the past, and that's why we've had concerns in the past.
Well, I think the problem there is some firms are not honest that they're using trainees and are exploiting the trainee, let alone the public. And as you say, Lynn, you know, even with somebody with just 6 months, they may not pass the exam, and that means all that time that person has been teaching, obviously, or one has to assume that they've been teaching to a substandard in all that 6 months. I mean, that's, you know, from a road safety point of view, and from the, you know, from the person paying that money, that is just not right. And I think DVSA should take a much stronger line with companies that they issue the pink badge to make sure that they do make sure that the public is made aware of this. I think that's DVSA's responsibility. I know they could say, oh, well, the person with the pink badge, but I think DVSA are issuing those pink badges, and that should be a caveat that goes with it.
Was it a policy? Would it be more of a way forward to just issue one license? In 6 months, is 6 months sufficient time that somebody, if it's issued at the right point, that somebody could have done their training and made use of the pink badge to actually get to a standard where they could take the test?
I understand that is what's happening now, Ed, that there are very few second licenses and it's one license, and I would hope that is what continues.
That seemed to be my understanding of the way it was going forward, and if that's already been put in place, then by what Nick's saying there, it already sounds like things are in place to sort of manage that, which is a good step forward in the right direction. John, yes.
Yeah, I'm pleased to. That's not something I've heard, and I'm pleased to hear that. I do lose confidence sometimes in the DVSA. I mean, if you ask me about my business, or at least one of my partners, we could tell you about every little scrap of data pertaining to advertising, inquiries, throughput, pass rates, a whole lot. We've got data for everything. Whenever I ask the DVSA, for example, how many people take out a pink license and don't qualify, they don't have the data. They don't have the stats, and they don't have the information. I put in a couple of freedom of information requests recently, and again, the information is not forthcoming. They don't have the information. So how they can manage things properly without the information worries me quite a lot. I do get.
And that is something that has been raised by NASP in the past, about data that is collected and should be collected. I mean, I think this has already been put into reports before, but we would like to see more data, for example, collected on standards checks of, of how people are performing. It was really good when we had the 7 reasons why people fail when it first came out, but it would be even better if that continued and we could have that updated and see what's happening with the statistics now. But unfortunately, that's not the case.
Yeah. We have, just to come back to some of the statements that are coming forward on the question box here, this is an interesting one actually, and it goes back to the pupils and finding pupils, and it's quite interesting. So I'd not actually thought about this, but a lot of the training seems to be focused around actually doing the training, but this one is saying that finding pupils is a skill that all ADIs need as part of their job. And that's an interesting way of looking at it, that it's also with training people to actually get into business as well, and having a business head on them, as well as having the ability to actually teach. Because how many people fall by the wayside because they can't actually fill their diary and make a living out of it?
It's a very fair point, that, but I would add a caveat that if I were a trainee, I would be advertising to give free lessons and taking business away from local instructors.
Right.
And I've done it from very early on in my training as well.
But you say that, John, but we already get large companies offering first lesson free now. So will they offer first 3 lessons free?
Well, they can't.
I never understand why people are giving away the first lesson free. I mean, it's a ridiculous thing to do, but it is a slippery slope, and I think we're aware, and as Lynn has already alluded to, I think it is a concern for a lot of training establishments, particularly the smaller ones, that this could be the case.
If they're not on a training license, Nick, they have to offer all lessons free.
Yeah. Ed, do we want to move on to how will the training change so that people that are listening in, do we want to just go down? We move on to
just that? Give me 1 sec, because I think there's just something else. Just let's have a second. Okay, there's somebody saying somebody's saying they've heard of second licenses being given without no questions being asked.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I'm saying that it's happening less often and it is being tightened up on. That's our understanding.
Yeah, right. Okay. Who wants to take up that one that Nick's just... Do you want to start off with that one, Nick, about moving on to the next piece?
Yeah, well, as Lynn has already said, it's going to run similar to the standards check. Which therefore, for those of you that may not be aware, the PDI can take any driver at all, so long as it's not an existing ADI or someone who's passed Part 2. So they could take anyone. Now, the thing, and Lynn will step in here, I'm sure, is that unlike the standards check where you turn up and you're already a qualified ADI, you then, under client-centered learning, see whether your pupil, what their goals are for that lesson, what they'd like to do, where they'd like to be by the end of that session. And you're going to try and strive towards that. Now, the ridiculous thing is when you're a PDI, you're being examined to see if you can get on the register. So for a PDI to turn up and say to the person, what would you like to do? What are your goals for today? And they say emerging at junctions. How are DVSA going to recognise whether this person has any depth of knowledge to any other aspects of training and coaching? That's not being measured. In other words, I think Lynn will correct me here. One of NJC's thoughts are that the DVSA could set just off the top of my head 4 different scenarios. So emerging or pedestrian crossings or a maneuver, or you see where I'm coming from, rather than the PDI turning up and setting the agenda. You got to think, what exam can you think of that happens?
Petals.
Lynn, do you want to come in and correct me on any of that?
Yeah, we've suggested that for half the time it's carried out as it's being suggested. and for half the time the topic is then changed out of a random selection. It's the fact that there's nothing random here in this test, which is slightly worrying, because most assessments would have some sort of random factors in them. John, can I ask John what he thinks about that?
I would be a lot happier. You mentioned the provisional period. I would be a lot happier if there were 2 standards checked. Present with someone who were nearing test standard or full license holder, and on another standards check with someone who was nearer the beginning phase, who was learning something for the first time. And provision would have to be made. I mean, some test centres would make early learning difficult, so DVSA would have to recognise that there might be a 10-minute drive out, a 10-minute drive back. But I think if there were 2 standards checks and it was stipulated that one was with an early stage person and another was with a later stage person, so it's nearer to the actual testing at the moment, which tested a broad base of skill. For example, a lot of people would have seen my example where I said you could take a full license holder on a motorway in an automatic car, and the next day, if you qualify, you could take a learner in a manual car, an absolute beginner in a manual car. Now, some people will say, well, mum and dads take absolute beginners, it's no big deal, but it is a big deal. Mum and dads take their child who they've known all their lives. When you're a driving instructor, you take in all comers, you know, from day one. And if you've not been tested at least 2 levels of skill competence, I think you're equipped to go out there and be let loose permanently on the public, so to speak. And I also don't think it's fair. Some people say, well, it's not permanent, John, they could fail the first check, the first standards check. Well, that's not very fair to the student then, because somebody sets themselves up as a driving instructor, they're not fully prepared, they manage to qualify, they pack up their other job and everything else, and all of a sudden they find they can't pass the next standards check. You know, it's a bit messy.
Yeah. James, not wishing to put you on the spot, you've been sitting there very quietly as our head of training. What are your thoughts or views on this?
I like John's idea of 2 standards checks, but I think you've still got a problem with randomisation, because if you could still take along your automatic full license holder and then an absolute beginner, and you've preset those. So I think there needs to be a random element. And in relation to like the examiner choosing the topic for part of the lesson, what happens if you take someone that there isn't really any alternative? So you take someone that is a full license holder and they perhaps are an advanced driver, and perhaps even just putting in a deliberate fault of they're not too good on their mirrors, but everything else about their driving is at such a high standard, it's difficult to pick out an area that needs improving. I think you've got to find a way of having a proper random element to the test. So it's either a pupil you haven't met before, maybe supplied by DVSA in some way, sorry, or we go back to role play.
It's interesting. When I became, I'm going back 30 years, maybe longer than 30 years, when the thing to have was RAC registration. I don't know if any of you guys remember being an RAC registered instructor, but it was the second qualification after the register, really. And we had to turn up. You'd turn up at Croydon, and they'd find somebody in the building who you'd never met, who was learning to drive, and you'd take them out for a lesson. Having never met them before, you'd have an hour in the car. I remember mine, the examiner fell asleep in the back. We were only out 20 minutes. But that was done in that way. But logistically, unless the DVSA had centres where learners could come along for free lessons or whatever, or subsidised training, I don't think it would meet the DVSA. I think the DVSA are driven by cost cutting here, and I don't think that would be a cost cutting solution.
But John, you mentioned free training. Why should these people be doing it free? Why are driving instructors even thinking that these people should come along and not be charged? They're being supposedly taught a skill or coached in how to drive, whichever label you want to put on it. Why are they not paying that? You know, why do we go down this road of thinking that we should give it away?
Well, what I was referring to before was what I refer to as student ADIs, who are not on a trainee license, who don't intend to take a trainee license, who need to get experience teaching live learners to take a live learner on the test.
So that's where it could be open to abuse then, as you're saying, just paying somebody and they're giving up petrol.
I don't think it's necessarily abuse. As I say, if I were training to be a driving instructor and I like to do things very thoroughly, I would get as many customers as I could. I would want to do it properly. I used customers because they wouldn't be paying me money, because it would be illegal for them to pay me money if I wasn't on a license. But I would be going out there and touting for business, for free business. And I think there are, how many students are at any given time? Between 4,000 and 6,000, something like that, at some stage in the process. So that's 4,000 or 6,000 people taking out the loop for learning to drive straight away. And if each one of those takes 4 or 5 people, you start getting towards £500,000 and £1 million business taken out of the driving instructor's economy.
What I don't want people to be feeling is that the NJC feel that ADI trainers out there are just going to be out there to beat the system. It isn't like that at all, but there will be some people that will, you know, try to do that. But there are some superb people out there doing ADI training. And in actual fact, we want to support those people. Some of those people are the small individual businesses, and those are the people that in the main have voiced concerns to us.
Well, I've just got somebody just come up with the average ADI is a B on the standards check. Is that showing they are perhaps not coping with the random effects of having an ordinary learner driver there? And these are people that are in it all day, every day. So, and it's something I've talked to local SE round with us, that he's saying that within the hour there will be randomization in the test. It doesn't matter whether you take a qualified, like James said, somebody at a high level with advanced driving. I currently go out with a lot of people that are at a high level, and there are randomized things that happen on the road that driver has to deal with, and that trainer will have to deal with. Then they'll have to be even better to be able to cope with that, because I think that's an even harder challenge than sat on a little back street with a learner driver. When you've got a car that's moving sometimes at pace with some of the advanced drivers and something happens, it's going to take an awful lot of coping with to actually be able to deal with that within that hour on the SC. And an hour's a long time of driving. If you go out for an hour's drive, there's an awful lot can happen on a road if you're driving at pace. You cover some miles.
True, yeah. The thing also with the PDI choosing the subject is they could turn up with somebody and it's lesson 1. If the DVSA follow this path, that's something that.
I think we're going to find that. Yeah, sorry. I think we're going to find that the DVSA will start to make it clearer in what they're going to write about this in more documentation. They're surely going to make it clearer what they're hoping people will bring to this, rather like they do on the standards check.
Yeah, because
so I think this is where we need to have we can't guess this. This is where we need the DVSA to be helping us with the solutions for what they're going to be telling us about this. I don't think we can start to second guess that.
No, but there's a really good point to go with this one, that if you take somebody that is at that standard, that is a beginner, and it is the first lesson that they're going to do, my question to you, Nick, is how is that ADI going to display the depth of knowledge in a moving vehicle that they can cope with a moving vehicle? I just don't see how then the examiner could mark it very well. And it's well noted that when I've spoken to SEs that they don't like the car being stationary, and they'll mark it accordingly. And I think they will mark it accordingly, that if the trainee who is presenting themselves for part 3 isn't displaying the skills then how can they mark it? I know that if something doesn't happen, they're supposed to mark a 3, but is that really how they're going to mark this? Because I think there'll have to be a different criteria of marking with this as well.
I think so.
Yeah, because the criteria of marking against what we've got, what we know as the SC, I think it'd be very hard to do that the same. I know we're only speculating. I can only speculate. This is my thoughts about where I'm coming from with this. But it's like with the advanced driver. I think equally, the advanced driver, you'd have to be brilliant. But I think with the learner driver, the basic skill set of starting off a lesson, you can't display what you'd need to do as an instructor. So I don't think that would work.
But let's not forget that on the standards check form, when it's marked, you start with 51, and then as things progress, you don't add to it. You would lose those marks. So I think you're right there, Ed, that if somebody wasn't displaying certain factors, which I don't think you could in a controls lesson, then you are going to start to drop those marks from the 3s, and they're going to go down. My understanding is that it will be marked in the same way with the same criteria, but again, we need confirmation of that from the DVSA.
If the lesson is going to be client-centred, you can only teach what the pupil needs or wants to know, or what they're capable of actually learning. So if it's a beginner, maybe if you're sat at the side of the road delivering a controls lesson for an hour, that might be marked as a fail. But if you get them moving and all you're doing is teaching them how to move along, stop, steer, the basics of car control, it's still a very limited amount of things that you're actually being tested on your ability to teach. You could set up anything you like. So I'm going to take a pupil that's going to ask me to teach me how to do a left reverse. And if they master that, they're then going to ask me to teach them a right reverse. So all I'm going to do for my part 3 is just teach reversing around the corner. But it's client-centred because that's what the pupil wants to do.
But then
you would still have to get to that site, and you'd still have to get back again and do some driving. I see where you're coming from, James.
Yes, but at some test centres, there could be a suitable site to do it just around the first corner.
Yeah.
There is, but you'd still have to show that. You'd still have to show that depth of client-centered teaching, wouldn't you? It's not going to be client-centered if you just do it instructor-led. And we don't want to assume that everybody's just going to go down that instructor-led route. I think when you get a lesson moving, it would soon show if you weren't being client-centered and teaching with client-centered methods. And I think for the depth of knowledge that you'd need to have to actually then do the lesson and coaching style and get the client-centered format working, the person sat there, if they haven't got the depth of knowledge, they're just going to fall apart.
Yeah, but could that not be rehearsed?
No, I don't think it could be. It could be to a certain extent, but as soon as it starts getting the randomisation and as soon as that pupil puts something in there that's not rehearsed, or there's another road user makes something happen that isn't in the rehearsal, what happens then? It's just going to fall apart. And then the risk assessment side is going to drop and they'd end up failing it on risk assessment.
Potentially, but you've got to realise that somebody can spend 2 or 3 days rehearsing something in a route, and lots of potential consequences, which you could argue might give them good teaching skills. And you've also got to remember that the pass mark's only 31, which is not very high. There's another issue. I'm agreeing with most of what's been said here. There's another with regard to training and how training will change, in that students will now have to completely learn and understand an area around a test centre. A test centre that, even if they expand the number of centres, could be 30 miles away. Or you could have a situation where the waiting list at a local test centre is a month or 6 weeks, and the waiting list down the road is 2 weeks, but they've got to travel 50 miles down the road. So they've somehow got to get a learner to that area to practice in that area. There are quite a few things that disadvantage the student here. There are some things that are advantageous, as you've said, Ed, in that they get real life experience with real life people. And I think that can only be a good thing, however it works.
The question we started with here, I think, was how will training change? And perhaps I'm not sure if people listening in are aware that on the gov.uk website there is the results of the survey that was carried out amongst some audit trainers as to whether some of them had heard about the changes, whether they'd started to adapt to their training. Some hadn't adapted it at all, others had started to become more client-centred. Don't forget that there will be, we are saying that there are going to be some changes that are coming in October, providing this goes through the legislation. But if there are changes coming, then the people who are doing the training now need to be aware of how their training should be changing already to meet that more client-centred approach.
Yeah, is there going to be a meeting? Is there a proposal either by DVSA or by the industry itself to get a meeting together and try and get heads around a table, whether it starts off with audit or other trainers?
At the last meeting we went to, we were told that the DVSA would be holding a meeting. In fact, it may be more than one meeting. One meeting in the country may not be enough. And they were going to come up with a date or some dates of what these meetings would be. As soon as we know, we will let people know, and obviously the DVSA will as well. But this is so that trainers who've not yet been invited to the meetings can have a chance to have a say and for their queries to be answered and for it to be discussed. And that's why I'm saying to you, it's not completely set in stone. But yeah, there will be meetings, but I don't have the dates yet.
Okay, I've got a question here. As an independent trainer, I'd like to know what support there will be, i.e. resources to assist me to change my training programme to a new regime. Any ideas? Has anything been mentioned?
I don't know that the DVSA are going to come up with resources. I'm sure there are lots of places where you'll be able to go and do train the trainer courses, but I'm not sure that the DVSA will come up with resources. But then again, there are usually resources that people can use when we have changes in the industry. As yet, I'm not aware of them because this has only just been announced, really. And so as yet, I'm not aware of what those are.
Okay, right. Thanks, Lynn.
That's a good question to take to the DVSA again, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, somebody just in support of somebody being on lesson 1. If you're scoring 3s on the 17 comps on lesson 1, then you will be brilliant. So obviously this person's got a feeling that if you do a really good lesson on that one, then obviously the skills might be transferable into other areas.
If you do a good lesson.
If you do
if
a
you
good
pass
lesson.
with a 32, it won't be so good.
Just having a look. Lynn, do you want to say about anything? How will the training change?
Well, that's what I'm saying. People will need to, they will need to change what they're doing. It depends how much people have changed already, because I suspect that some people have already started to be much more client-centred. But at the same time, currently, we are still, at the end of the day, trying to get somebody through the current part 3. So that has to be, you have to be mindful of that when you're sending your pupils for the part 3. I'm hoping that most trainers would have already started to make some adjustments to training, but if they haven't, they will certainly need to be starting to do that.
Well, as you've already said, Lynn, I mean, it will be an hour's lesson, which NJC or anybody in NASP have sort of said, well, maybe an hour isn't long enough. But I mean, the current regime is it's 2 theoretically half-hour sessions, phase 1 and phase 2. Well, it won't be done like that, other than John's suggestion as, well, we could break it down into 2, but 2 completely different days, 2 completely different times with 2 completely proper different level students, which I think is actually quite a good idea. And of course, would make more money for DVSA.
I think that logbook is an absolutely vital part to this. Yeah.
Something on the logbook. Just one sec, because I'm just going back up here. Just glad you've
You
come back.
mentioned earlier on about video. Are you suggesting then, if this was an idea, that DVSA should look at this video or some footage of it? Have they got the resources or the manpower? Is it going to be every 5 PDIs that turn up, they look at it? I mean, how's that going to work?
That's my question. That we think it is a good idea. And the question is, how would it work? What have they got the resources to do that? Is that a possibility? Because yes, it would be a good idea. It shows a lot, doesn't it? A video can speak volumes. If you film something.
There's already a lot of, is it Petals that actually, and some of the other courses do video analysis, don't they? And they take on video footage and they'll actually assess that as part of the examination. And if I'm not wrong, I think it's Petals, or is it now Dettles? You actually choose your own subject to teach in that as well.
I mean, I would.
What we're saying is has the DVSA got the manpower, the resources to look at however long these videos are? I mean, how many are we talking about?
Well,
Thousands.
It wouldn't need to be looked at in great depth, would it? If you had videos on, I don't know if most people have iPads or some other source, or even if it was on a flash drive, and it would just a matter of randomly going through it, wouldn't it? Just to watch sections of it.
Well,
John?
I don't even think that. I think if there were tools such as part of your training, you have to have videos on X number or X topics. They needn't necessarily always be assessed. They could be assessed 1 test in 3, and it could be 10 minutes assessment of one of the random topics. Likewise, it could be reflective notes as well. You have to have reflective notes covering all your training, and it's randomised. For me, it only takes an examiner maybe 10 or 15 minutes of test time to look at any randomised topic or any randomised area, who could say, right, before you can come along for your test, I want to see your video on this, and I want it emailed to me by tomorrow. So, you know, there are ways and means in the same way that other courses do. They don't check every bit of evidence, but they do request some evidence. So my suggestion will be that you have to create a portfolio of evidence, and that will be randomly assessed. Some people won't be assessed at all. Some people will be assessed randomly. And the sort of VAT audit could exist where some people are really put to the inquisition, so to speak, but you don't know what you're going to get. And it reintroduces the randomisation again.
And that's one of the things in that's one of the things in the document that we would like to see this logbook being looked at the standards check, at the new standards check, so that we'd like to see it being looked at, and that's possibly where the video could be looked at. But I like your idea of it being possibly on a random basis, John, because I can see that would actually work.
You've got to have a portfolio of evidence. I'm not going to tell you which bit I want to look at. You know, and that is what makes it, and that means that at least some training has to be in place. Of course, the evidence could be forged, but it's a heck of a lot more difficult. So you might as well just do the training.
I think in a lot of cases like this, you might as well just do the training. But it's very easy to look at the negative, isn't it? And it's very easy to focus on that. And I think we've got to remind ourselves that there's a positive change coming about here. And it's looking at ways that we can provide the solutions for it rather than staying negative about it and looking for anything can be abused. Any system you want to choose to look at, that it could be gone down the wrong way. So it's quite easy to go down that route, but it's good that we keep bringing it back around.
I'd like to think that's what we've been trying to do, Ed, to keep the communications open and to try and help come up with some solutions. I'm very pleased, and we haven't got it on the bullet points here, but I'm really pleased with what I'm hearing about audit and the way that will be developing, that people are much more likely to want to become part of audit and consider that they want to be part of audit. That section I'm more than happy with from what I've seen of it. So let's keep this communication open and see if we can't get what we've currently been told is happening. Let's see if we can't get it even better.
Yeah. Just a quick round on because it's now 10 to, so we've been going 50 minutes. I think we'll try and wrap this one up. So we'll just go through each of the panel and wrap it up. Try a nice positive note as to what we think are the benefits to this change. Lynn.
Sorry, you caught me out there. Come back to
Sorry,
me and
yeah,
I'll
come back to you,
at the
John.
end. Sorry.
Yeah, benefits of the change, John.
I think it's well known that I've sorted out very many negatives, but I've also discussed lots of positives with people in a term to try and get people to think about this in a structured way. I think the positives are that if we can get a decent and a proper assessment that involves a live learner, it's got to be better than just using role play. There is a difficulty in making that work. I hope the DVSA can make it work. We're kind of prepared to do in my business for the change, whatever happens. But I just hope that things don't go the way some of my pessimistic thoughts have gone, you know. And I hope that it can be positive and that it does lead to a better standard of training, because that's what we need. It's something that will drive better training, because really it's not the Part 3 that's let the industry down over the years. I'm sorry, guys, if you're out there and you're trainers, but it's the training that's let the business down and the abuse of the current system. So I do welcome a change very, very much, and that's very positive.
Thank you, John. Thanks for your time tonight as well. James.
I think moving to a standards check type system has got to be an improvement on over the preset tests, where many people were just taught how to prepare for those preset tests. So I think it's great that we're moving to a more client-centered method of teaching. I hope that the majority of ADI trainers will train their future ADIs well. My fear is just that the proposal is open to abuse. So what we need to do is have the randomization element in it, and after that, if we can get that, I think it's great.
Right, lovely. Thank you, Nick.
I think we welcome the changes because we know the Part 3 has gone past its sell-by date a long time ago. So done properly and with good trainers doing the job properly, then I think, yes, we could see an improvement. But as James has said, we just hope there isn't any abuse to the system, and that where there could be, let's hope that can be shut down. But if people are doing the job and being trained with real live students, then let's hope their depth of knowledge, because I think that's what our industry needs, better depth of knowledge. And if that can be achieved, then brilliant.
Yeah, and I'd just like to bring in mind before I come to you, Lynn, so you've got a few more seconds to think. I welcome the changes, and I think they're really good. The depth of training needs to be there, and what's evident at the moment is I'm still coming across people that are coming forward that have been in the job 6 months. And I went out with somebody just the other day who was still basing their training on the same way that they were taught the PST3s. And there is too much of a differential between one and getting into the industry and then what you're assessed on while you're actually training. So this is a big step forward to moving towards making it all more client-centered. So the trainers will be training the pupils, the trainees in a way that matches the standards. And it's the national and driver rider standards, which haven't been mentioned at all tonight, actually, until just now, that we're trying to align everything with. And they've been out there for a number of years now. And it's a step forward to moving things towards those national driver and rider training standards. And then that's what I look forward to is being able to take people out and then develop them further. Instead of starting afresh, we can continue their journey. And it's a journey of learning. And that's where I'm looking forward to it all going. Lynn.
Yeah, well, I definitely think it's a change for the better. I can think of all the times that with the Part 3 we teach, finding faults, correcting them, analysing them. It's all about faults and mistakes, and I think this is so much better. It's so much more positive to be a standards check style. So I fully approve of that. I would like to carry on talking and get people to just take everybody's views on board, and to try and come up with solutions, and also ways in which we can help the trainers. So that's what I'd like to see, and that's what I intend to do as chair at ADINJC, just to keep talking and liaising with both NASP and the DVSA, and keeping the channels open, and see if we can get this better than it sounds at the moment. Because I don't think it's 100% perfect, but it's certainly a change for the better.
Yeah, brilliant. Right. Has anybody got any last minute questions? We've just had one or two things come in while I've just been looking at this. The A1 assessor route, and people going down A1 assessor, trying to look at that as an extra qualification to go alongside of their training. That's what this person has done. Somebody here agreeing with John. John's ideas sound good. Just have a look at this. Oh, my thing hasn't gone. No, the others are all sort of statements that we can have a read of afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, so no, we haven't got any more questions coming. Thank you very much for everybody for attending tonight. Thank you for all your input. We have loads of sort of statements coming, which is brilliant. Some feedback that's coming into it. So thank you very much. Looking forward to the next webinar, which is Tuesday, the 25th of April. And as Lynn said, we're trying to get somebody from the DVSA on with us for this one, for part 2. I'd like to thank the panel. Thank you, John, all the way from Ireland, and James and Nick for joining us tonight. And Lynn, I know you've had a busy day and you've had to do a quick rush out, and I saw the emails coming in at 6:30 this morning. So you've obviously had another day. I was up at 6
It's been a long day.
Yeah, been a long day. Thank you, panel. Thank you for everybody for listening. Good night, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks, everybody.